Chapter 19 The Egg Sack. Next morning, when the first light came into the sky and the sparrows stirred in the trees, when the cows rattled their chains and the rooster crowed and the early automobiles went whispering down the road, Wilbur awoke and looked for Charlotte. He saw her overhead in a corner in the back of his pen, and she was very quiet. Her 8 legs were spread wide. She seemed to have shrunk during the night. Next to her, attached to the ceiling, Wilbur saw a curious object. It was sort of a sack or a cocoon. It was peach-colored and looked as though it were made of cotton candy. "Are you awake, Charlotte?" he said softly. "Yes," came an answer. "What's that nifty little thing? Did you make it?" "I did indeed," replied Charlotte in a weak voice. "Is it a plaything?" "Plaything? I should say not. It's my egg sack. My magnum opus." "I don't know what a magnum opus is." "That's Latin," said Charlotte. "It means great work. This egg sack is my great work, the finest thing I've ever made." "What's inside it?" asked Wilbur. "Eggs?" 514 of them, she replied. 514? said Wilbur. "You are kidding." "No, I am not. I counted them. I got started counting, so I kept on just to keep my mind occupied." "It's a perfectly beautiful egg sack," said Wilbur, feeling as happy as though he had constructed it himself. "Yes, it is pretty," said Charlotte, patting the sack with her 2 front legs. "Anyway, I can guarantee you it is strong. It is made out of the toughest material I have. It is also waterproof. The eggs inside will be warm and dry." "Charlotte," said Wilbur dreamily, "are you really going to have 514 children?" "If nothing happens, yes," she said. "Of course they won't show up till next spring." Wilbur noticed that Charlotte's voice sounded sad. "What makes you so downhearted? I should think you'd be terribly happy." "Oh, don't pay any attention to me," said Charlotte. "I just don't have much pep left anymore. I guess I feel sad because I won't ever see my children." "What do you mean you won't see your children? Of course you will. We'll all see them. It's going to be simply wonderful next spring in the barn cellar with 514 baby spiders running all over the place. And the geese will have a new set of goslings, and the sheep will have new lambs." "Maybe," said Charlotte quietly. "However, I have a feeling I'm not going to see the results of last night's efforts. I don't feel good at all. I think I'm languishing, to tell the truth." Wilbur didn't understand the word languish, and he hated to bother Charlotte by asking her to explain, but he was so worried that he had to ask. "What does languishing mean?" "It means I'm slowing up, feeling my age. I'm not young anymore, Wilbur. But I don't want you to worry about me. This is your big day. Look at my web. Doesn't it show up well, with the dew on it?" Charlotte's web never looked more beautiful than it did this morning. Each strand held dozens of bright drops of early morning dew. The light from the east struck and made it plain and clear. It was a perfect piece of designing and building. In another hour or two, a steady stream of people would pass by admiring it and reading it, and looking at Wilbur and marveling at the miracle. As Wilbur lay studying the web, a pair of whiskers and a sharp face appeared. Slowly Templeton dragged himself across the pen and threw himself down in the corner. "I'm back," he said. "What a night!" The rat was swollen to twice his normal size. His stomach was big and round like a jelly jar. "What a night," he said. "What feasting and carousing, a real gorge. I must have eaten the remains of 30 lunches. Never have I seen such leavings, and everything well ripened and seasoned with the passage of time and the heat of day. Oh, it was rich, my friends, rich." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Charlotte. "If it would serve you right, you could have an acute attack of indigestion." "Don't worry about my stomach," snarled Templeton. "It can handle anything. And I got some bad news. As I came past that pig next door, the one who calls himself Uncle, I noticed a blue tag on the front of his pen. That means he won first prize. I guess you're licked, Wilbur. You might as well relax. Nobody's going to hang any medals on you. Furthermore, I wouldn't be surprised if Zuckerman changes his mind about you. Wait till he gets a hankering for some fresh pork and ham and crisp bacon. He'll take the knife to you, my boy. Be still, Templeton. You're too stuffed and bloated to know what you're saying. Don't pay any attention to him, Wilbur." Wilbur tried not to think about what the rat had just said and decided to change the subject. "Templeton," said Wilbur, "if you weren't so dopey, you would have noticed that Charlotte has made an egg sack. She's going to be a mother. For your information, there are 514 eggs in that peachy little sack." "Is this true?" Eyeing the sack suspiciously. "Yes, it's true," said Charlotte. "Well, congratulations. This has been a night." And he closed his eyes, pulled up some straw for himself, and dropped into a deep sleep. Wilbur and Charlotte were glad to be rid of him for a little while. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Arable's truck rolled into the fairgrounds and came to a stop at Wilbur's pen, and everyone climbed out. "Look," cried Fern. "Look at Charlotte's Web. Look what it says." The grown-ups and children joined hands there and looked at the new sign. "Humble," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Now isn't that just the word for Wilbur?" Everyone rejoiced to find the miracle of the web had been repeated. Wilbur gazed up lovingly in their faces. He looked very humble and grateful. Fern winked at Charlotte. Lurvy got busy. He poured a bucket of warm slops through the trough, and Wilbur ate his breakfast, and then Lurvy scratched him gently with a smooth stick. "Wait a minute," said Avery. "Look at this." He pointed to a blue tag in Uncle's pen. "This pig has already won first prize." The Zuckermans and the Arables stared at the tag. Mrs. Zuckerman began to cry. Nobody said a word. They just stared at the tag. Then they stared at Uncle. And they stared at the tag again. Lurvy took out an enormous handkerchief and blew his nose very loud, so loud, in fact, that the noise was heard by the stable boys in the horse barn. "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "I want to go to the Midway." "You are staying right where you are," said her mother. Tears came to Fern's eyes. "What's everybody crying about?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Let's get busy. Edith, bring the buttermilk." Mrs. Zuckerman wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. She went from the truck and got the gallon of buttermilk. "Bath time," said Zuckerman cheerfully. He and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery climbed into Wilbur's pen. Avery slowly poured buttermilk on Wilbur's head and back, and it trickled down his sides and cheeks, and then Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman rubbed it into his hair and skin. Passers-by stopped to watch. Pretty soon, quite a crowd had gathered. Wilbur grew beautifully white and smooth. The morning sun shone through his pink ears. "He's isn't as big as the pig next door," said one bystander, "but he's cleaner, and that's what I like." "So do I," said a man. "He's humble, too," said a woman, reading the sign. Everybody who visited the pig pen had a good word to say about Wilbur. Everyone admired the web, and of course, nobody noticed Charlotte. Suddenly a voice was heard on the loudspeaker. "Attention, please. Will Mr. Homer Zuckerman bring his famous pig to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand? A special award will be made there in 20 minutes. Everyone is invited to attend. Crate your pig, please, Mr. Zuckerman, and report to the judge's booth." For a moment after this announcement, the Arables and the Zuckermans were unable to speak or move. Then Avery picked up a handful of straw and threw it high in the air and gave a loud yell. The straw fluttered down like confetti in Fern's hair. Mr. Zuckerman hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. Mr. Arable kissed Mrs. Arable. Avery kissed Wilbur. Lurvy shook hands with everybody. Fern hugged her mom. Avery hugged Fern. Mrs. Arable hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. Up overhead, in the shadows of the ceiling, Charlotte crouched unseen, her front legs encircling her egg sac. Her heart was not beating as strongly as usual, and she felt weary and old, but she was sure that she at last had saved Wilbur's life, and she felt contented and peaceful. "We have no time to lose," shouted Mrs. Zuckerman. "Lurvy, help with the crate." "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "You wait," said Mrs. Arable. "Can't you see everyone's busy?" "Put that empty buttermilk jar in the truck," commanded Mr. Arable. Avery grabbed the jar and rushed to the truck. "Does my hair look all right?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman. "Looks fine," said Mr. Zuckerman as he and Lurvy set the crate down. "You don't even look at my hair," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "You're all right, Edith," said Mrs. Arable. "Just keep calm." Templeton, asleep in the straw, heard the commotion and awoke. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but when he saw the men shoving Wilbur in the crate, he made up his mind that he would go along. He watched his chance, and was nobody was looking, he crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw. "All ready, boys," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Let's go." He and Mr. Arable, Lurvy, and Avery grabbed the crate and boosted it over the side of the pen and up into the truck. Fern jumped aboard and sat on the crate. She still had straw in her hair and looked very pretty and excited. Mr. Arable started the motor. Everyone climbed in, and they drove off to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand. As they passed the Ferris wheel, Fern gazed up at it and wished that she were at the topmost car with Henry Fussy at her side.